I'll use myself as an example. I took my two kids out when, like, during the polar vortex, quite a few years back. But I think my youngest was 4 at the time, and there was a wind chill of, according to the weatherman,
yes,
the wind chill was like -40. And they're basically saying that, you're going to, don't open the door or you'll die. And I'm just like, I got to find out. Is it really
You're kidding me.
Am I going to die?
I trusted the weatherman that day.
If you're going to go out in those temperatures, you just got to make sure that you don't have any skin exposed or minimal skin exposed. So I put balaclavas on my kids. So basically all you could see was like this gap for their eyes. We were out there for like 45 minutes and I still had to drag the kids in.
Hey guys, my name is Shayla. Welcome to the Hey Shayla Podcast. I went from full-time travel to full-time new COVID mom, and holy wow, is motherhood and adulting a learning curve. There are so many decisions we need to make and a million ways to do it right. I created this podcast to interview some of my gurus to share their knowledge and empower you on your journey. Let me be your guinea pig and ask the questions that you think everyone else knows. Here, we're a little hippie. We try to do things as naturally as possible, and we don't take ourselves too seriously. But above all, we support one another and work to find what works. If you're into it, you're our people. Let's get started. Thank you, everybody, for coming back and listening to the Hey Shayla podcast. Today, I am so excited because I've been reading There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, and now I have the author Linda on my podcast. And I know a lot of listeners are also super stoked because I've been talking about it so much, they've started reading it. And because it's negative temperatures here in so many places, everybody is just so interested in getting outside now. And I think it's just like the coolest. So thank you so much for being on. I was stoked that you said that you were willing to come on.
Of course.
I'm excited. Yes. I'm so excited to just like hear kind of your story on why you wrote the book. And I mean, you grew up in Sweden, you moved to the US and you saw all these changes, and I'm grateful that you wrote everything and are inspiring us all. So if you want to start with just kind of like telling your background of how you grew up, how you got to the US, things you saw, I would love that.
Yeah. So I grew up in Sweden, so approximately on the same latitude as the Gulf of Alaska. So and grew up in a very outdoorsy culture. So grew up playing outdoors every day, regardless of the weather. There's that old Scandinavian saying, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. And that's where obviously where the title for my book comes from. And just grew up in a sort of typical Swedish family with lots of outdoor activities. And then when I was in college, I was an exchange student in Australia, and lo and behold, down there, I met an American. And after I graduated from college, I moved over to Montana, is where we started out, lived there for a couple of years. And that was a fairly smooth transition, actually. Montana felt very home to me, the mountains and all the skiing and the camping and lots of access to forests and so forth. And then we decided to move to my husband's home state of Indiana to start a family. And that's when I got the real sort of culture shock because I mean, not only is there a big difference between Sweden and Montana, even though, I mean, I felt at home, but there's still some cultural differences. But moving to Indiana, it was almost like a bigger difference than moving from Sweden to Montana. It was like two different worlds entirely. And I noticed that in the winter, like I never saw people outside. It was almost as if, once the temperature started to drop, people went into some sort of hibernation. And I was just not prepared for that, because in Sweden we go outside, every day all year round, and we try to savor each season for what it is, and find things to do when it's cold out. And once I had kids, then that's when it really hit home that, oh my God, my kids are not going to have the same type of childhood that I had, because at daycare, well, for one, when they were real little and I would walk them outside in the cold, people thought I was stranded without a car. They felt sorry, like they took pity on me, being
they
out
were
there.
Midwest nice and checked on you to make sure that you were okay.
Yeah, they were trying to help out, offered me a ride with my stroller and diaper bag and everything. And I'm like, oh my God.
I'm good. Thank you.
And when I explained that I was just outside because I enjoyed the fresh air, they looked at me like I was from a different planet. And so that made me feel like very odd, I suppose.
Totally, yeah.
And then I realized that at daycare, the kids were inside all the time, in nicer weather. They might go outside for a little bit, but in the wintertime, it was non-existent. Like, the kids didn't even come to daycare with outdoor clothes. They just came like in their regular indoor clothes. And this was foreign to me, because in Scandinavia, kids at preschool and daycare, they're outside every day, and they come, dressed for it as well. And then as the kids got older and got into elementary school, it was the same thing there. All of a sudden, they barely had recess. And in the wintertime, it was like always something wrong with the weather. It was always a reason for the administration to keep the kids inside. And I know that the kids were bouncing off the walls,
yeah.
And that's when I felt like, okay, there's a story to tell here. And I felt like, with my unique perspective, being from Sweden and having experienced that,
Totally.
I felt like, I think I need to write a book about this. So that's what led up to me writing the book.
And you were a journalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are? Yeah. So
yes, I'm a journalist and writer. I worked on anything writing, so not just journalistic texts, but content and so forth. And I write a blog too, which takes up a lot of my time too.
Right, which is Rain or Shine Mama, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I remember you referencing that a couple of times in your book as well. But I mean, I feel like the task of writing a book, you're like, I thought writing a book would be a good idea. I'd be like, what? Writing a book. So you have a little bit of experience in that. And I think right, you do have that unique perspective. And that's kind of what we were talking about before we get on, is like, you grew up in the culture. So you grew up, that was just like the norm. It wasn't like you were this outdoor enthusiast, like extremist that like learned all the things to be outside. And so it's funny, because I even have questions where I'm like, well, what about this? What about this? And I feel like they're pretty basic questions as far as like where you're from. It's just like, what do you mean? What do you wear?
Yeah.
Like just simple
that's the
things.
thing. Like I had a friend ask me who had a baby at the same time as me, and she asked me, when do you think it'll be safe for me to take my baby outside for a walk? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, my kids outside on the back porch, like, taking a nap right now is it's like single digit temperatures.
Totally.
So
But then in the book you talked about how
that was normal. Yeah, that's what all my friends in Sweden were doing too. So it was nothing strange to me. That's what I did when I was a baby too. So when you grow up with that and you see that, you feel safe doing that. But if you've never seen that, I can see how that could be sound like really strange, a strange thing to do.
Totally.
So.
And I have a friend even in Minnesota that had their I don't know, 3-month-old or something in the stroller, bundled up, like safe mom. And they were by a fire out on this outdoor patio or something. And someone inside called the cops on her.
Oh my God.
And she's sitting there with her baby. And so I don't know
God.
if they actually called, but she's like, there's a woman outside with an infant. Like, so, yeah. And if she was sitting outside, it clearly wasn't negative a million degrees. Like it was comfortable enough to be out there, but that's the cultural. And it's so funny because here you have, I don't know, there's all these Instagram accounts where you can follow to how to help your baby sleep. And so for me, I'm like, her wake window was too small. This was too small. And I was getting a DM from somebody, I think from Sweden. And she was like, I swear if the window's not open when she's sleeping, and I'm like, window open? I've never even considered opening the window while she's sleeping. She's like, oh, she just sleeps so much better when the window's open. I'm like, are you kidding me? So it's just bizarre. But that's what I love. Yeah. And even for me, because I grew up here, but I mean, we didn't do a ton outside. I grew up in that where you were like, oh, it's too cold to go outside. We're not doing it. So now I'm like, okay, it's too cold to go outside. So I'm trying to put Aaliyah like in her oven. I'm like, do you want to go outside? And she's like, no. She's a year and a half. So she's just saying no. And I'm like, yeah, me neither. Put your boots on. Let's do this. Like, and it's when you're prepared and you're ready, it's so nice. Like the air is so fresh and clean. And it just, even for you, you're like, oh, this is like burning a couple hours and we just get to be outside and enjoying the fresh air. And so, but you went to Sweden for 6 months with your kids at one point. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's when, to research my book, I wanted to find out, like, what if we went back to Sweden for, say, 6 months? What would happen? Because I was getting frustrated. I felt like my kids were not getting outside enough. Like I tried to compensate at home, but still, they had really long days at school and it was all very academic. Don't even get me started on that.
Yeah.
But, and I was getting frustrated and I felt like, I want to see what happens if we go back to Sweden for a while. And so we did. And that kind of, that became the basis for my book. So the book kind of follows us in Sweden and I enroll my youngest in preschool and my older one in second grade. And, just to follow their adventures in a completely different school system and what it does to them, and they really got into a really good rhythm of making a habit of being outside, not just at home, which had been the case in the US, where I was kind of the only person, it felt like, championing this outdoor time for my kids. Because I guess tiring, like you can't do it alone. Like I often say that it takes a village to raise an outdoor child. In Sweden, we have so much help from the preschools and the schools. And like grandparents and like there's a whole support system, so it was a very different experience. And and we actually we moved back 4 years ago, so we actually live in Sweden now.
So nice. What time is it there? That's the other thing I was going to ask you.
It's about 8:45 p.m.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you. I was like, let me know time zones. But also in your book, I loved that you addressed like, there's kids over there climbing icy trees. Like that's in the US, they're like, get down from there. You're going to get hurt. Da, 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 da. Oh, we're not going outside anymore because someone fell on the ice. And I love that you showed the perspective from Sweden where they're like, they've climbed those trees before. Like the trust that you put into your kid. Yeah.
I think there's a much higher tolerance for messy and risky play in Sweden than there is in the US, where unfortunately we've just become very risk averse. And that's just happened in the past few generations. Because if you talk to older Americans, they'll tell you, they told me, like, that's not how it used to be. Like skin knees, it used to be part of childhood, like a rite of passage almost.
Yeah,
And now it's like any risk at all is just deemed bad for the child. But what people tend to forget is that maybe being inside on your couch is maybe the greatest risk of all. Look at the lifestyle diseases that are
totally.
uh, that are dominating right now. I mean, all of those pretty much can be uh, prevented, or you can lower your risk for all the major lifestyle diseases by spending time outside and being physically active outside. It is so needed in society today, and it's such a basic thing. And it's crazy that it's not a bigger part of I think the childhood and the conversation about what children need. There's way too much focus, I think, on like the early academics and getting kids to like hit all these academic milestones, when in fact what they need is something maybe a lot more basic than that, and that is just time to play outside, unstructured, without the intervention of adults, and just being allowed to test their boundaries, engage in this messy and risky play. And I think, there's just so much learning in that. They learn to regulate their emotions and like problem solve, risk management, of course.
Right.
And to delay gratification. And I mean, there's so much, and there's so much research on this now that has cropped up in the past 10 years. I'd say, it's just exploded. And so I just feel like, well, I think the research is there. We have the facts. I mean, now we just gotta take that next step of actually, we need to get outside more. And
Right.
of course, I think the pandemic it's kind of helped fuel this in some places, where we see a lot of schools now, creating these outdoor classrooms, and that's, it's just highlighting one of the great benefits of outdoor time, and that is that the transmission of viruses and bacteria is much lower outside. I saw one study showing that for COVID, this was before Omicron, but COVID, the risk of transmission is 19 times greater inside than outside. So
Whoa.
that alone tells you something.
Right.
And it's the same with, when you look at forest schools, when they compared sick days to kids at forest school, where they're outside for the better part of the day, those kids have fewer sick days than kids at traditional preschools. So there's definitely a lot of health benefits at work.
Totally. Yeah, it's funny because I remember getting hurt on the playground, and it just is what it's fine, it's no big deal. And I think that kind of giving your kids the ability to fall and to experience that gives them the body awareness and risk management. Like the other day, Aaliyah fell off of a stool. She has a big bruise on her head. Like I wasn't there, but I came when she was crying. And my sister's like, yeah, she fell off the stool and bonked her head. And like, I was like, okay. And Seth and I were talking about it, and he was like, put my kid in bubble wrap when she was little. And I've had to be like, okay, she can stand on the fireplace thing. It's only a foot high. Like it's going to be okay. Everything's fine. Yeah. And so he's like telling me, but I think he's just telling himself, he's like, yeah, we just really have to let her like do things and kind of like learn. And I'm like, I was like, it's one thing if we leave her sitting on the countertop of the kitchen by herself while we go in the other room. And it's another thing if we are standing there while she's on a stool. Like it's risk management and figuring out this could actually hurt you. So we're not going to do that. And this, I'm going to let you figure it out a little bit, and you might get hurt, but you're not going to get like seriously injured.
Yeah, it's just finding that balance between, hazards and risks. You gotta try and be able to distinguish between the two. Risky play doesn't mean allowing your child to do hazardous things, but just risks that they can sort of foresee and that they can learn from. I think it's better that they make those little mistakes when they're
Yeah.
little, and that way, hopefully, they're able to to avoid bigger injuries when they're older. And you know what? Sometimes injuries do happen. That's the fact of life. But there's also an element of developing resiliency here too. So you want to show like through risky play, children will experience those injuries, and they will, they'll get back up, and they'll be okay, and they'll develop that resilience, and that's really key to success in life, both in
Totally.
academic work and life in general. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Let's get into a little bit of recommendations that you have for getting outside, because when I put on my Instagram, like, oh, you guys, what do we have questions for? A lot of them were like, what is too cold? I have an infant. Can I take them out? At what point do I bring them back inside? Like, obviously when it's cold, or I don't know, can you define like, don't go outside, be outside for a little bit, you're good to go? I'm going to take a quick pause. I'm trying to get us outside as much as possible. And as somebody that doesn't love being outside in the cold, just trying to eliminate the barriers to getting outside. And I keep seeing merino wool as a base layer, fleece as a second layer, and a waterproof exterior. I found this base layer called Explore. I got Aaliyah a set. I got myself a set. Merino wool is supposed to keep you warm in the winter, cool in the summertime. It's an investment, but for me, it was like, I know we're going to be warm, and it's one less thing I have to worry about. You can get 20% off with code HeyShayla. Highly recommend. Let's get back to the show.
I understand that people want like a number on this,
Yeah.
but it's not that easy. It's not that easy. It depends on a lot of things. Temperature is not just a temperature. It can depend on humidity, what's the wind chill.
Mm-hmm.
Does your body run warm or cold typically? Like, what amount of physical activity do you take part in? Because physical activity is huge when it comes to staying warm. And anytime, this is something that you just got to learn through experience, right? You gotta and the best way of learning is to just get out there. And if you are at all concerned about it being too cold, my advice is always, stay close to home or close to your car where you can easily get out of the cold. I'll use myself as an example. I took my two kids out during the polar vortex, quite a few years back, but I think my youngest was 4 at the time. And there was a wind chill of, according to the weatherman,
yes,
the wind chill was like -40. And I was like,
Fahrenheit.
And they're basically saying that, you're going to, don't open the door or you'll die. And I'm just like, now, like, I got to find out, is it really
You're kidding me.
Am I going to die?
I trusted the weatherman that day. I remember this vividly, and I was like, I'm not doing anything. My car wouldn't start.
So, if you're going to go out in those temperatures, you just got to make sure that you don't have any skin exposed or minimal skin exposed. So I put balaclavas on my kids. So basically all you could see was like this little gap for their eyes. And
wait, that's like a whole head.
It's like a rubber, it looks like one of those rubber hoods. You just pull it over your head, and it's just got like a small opening for your eyes. Yeah, okay. I use it often when skiing, but rarely in daily life. It rarely gets that cold around here. But if you're gonna go out in -40, you want a balaclava. So we bundled up, we went outside, and we were out there for like 45 minutes, and I still had to drag the kids in because they wanted to stay out longer. But at that point I was like, maybe we should head back in because I'm getting cold. So it can definitely be done. But having said that, like if you're going to go out in that kind of cold, you might also want to just like read up on early signs of frostbite, just so like what to expect. Like look for white cold spots on the skin, or older kids can usually, they can tell if their fingers or feet are usually, they're the first to get cold, right?
Yeah.
So they can usually tell if their feet or fingers start to, if you get like this tingling feeling, or if they feel stiff or small. With younger kids, then you got to be a little more cautious because they don't communicate as well, and also so they tend to stand still more when they get cold. So that's one sign you can look for, because the body is trying to conserve energy.
Interesting.
And but you just gotta try it and stay close to home. Now, babies, that's kind of a different chapter, because babies obviously can't tell us how they're feeling. And also babies, when sleeping outside, they don't necessarily wake up crying if they get cold. So with babies, you got to be a little more cautious. And also babies don't regulate their body temperature as well as older kids. So with them, you got to be, if it's really cold out, I can say doctors in Sweden, they generally, like they say, it's perfectly safe down to a -10 Celsius, which is about 14 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's like the general recommendation here. But as I write in my book, there are plenty of people, at least in Finland and probably in Sweden too, who keep their kids out for naps for hours at a time, sometimes, and temperatures down to like -25 Celsius, which I think is about -13 Fahrenheit, if I remember that conversion right.
I have it up because I felt like we were going to do this a lot. -25 Celsius. Yeah. -13 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, -13 Fahrenheit. And that's probably a little colder than I would feel comfortable with. So that's kind of where you just gotta sort of try that out and see. I think it might be just as common to sort of overbundle baby for sleeping outside because you're so worried that they're going to be cold. But you can check on your baby's temperature by checking hands and feet, which they typically are a little colder than the rest of the body. So if you're concerned about your baby's temperature, check the chest and also the back, here, the neck. So you don't want them to be sweaty, because then that's too warm. And you can check their forehead and make sure they're not too cold. And always just make sure also that their airways are not restricted in any way. So, because that, you gotta, when you bundle them up a lot, you want to be sure that they can still breathe. So
it's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
We've been going.
And I've gotten the question that, well, I understand that sounds insane that people leave their babies out in like -13. And people have asked about sudden infant death syndrome, but there doesn't seem to be a correlation. The one thing, because Finland has like one of the lowest rates of SIDS in the world, and I think what you just got to be cautious, or maybe look out for, is that babies tend to sleep they take longer and deeper naps outside. So I know that longer naps and deeper sleep could be sort of a risk factor. So, just check on them regularly and make sure they're okay. But obviously people are doing this in, at least in the Nordic countries, and all the Nordic countries actually have really low infant mortality rates. So
well, I think
that
it's just
should be
whatever
reassuring.
yeah, right. But I think it's whatever you're comfortable with. Like if you're listening and you're going, I would never put my kid out in -14. Cool. Don't do it.
Yeah.
Do not do
Right.
it.
Right.
If you are like nothing lower than 30, then that's your number, and just like
Yeah.
stick with that. And if your baby does well, how you have them bundled at 30, then like that's what I think, whatever you're comfortable with. I don't think
Yeah.
somebody should just listen and go, okay, yeah, -14
Right.
in a onesie.
That's why I
like,
say, that's why I hesitate. I don't want to,
right.
I don't
I'm
want to
sure.
give a number,
Yeah.
because you gotta try it out. And a great way of starting out is taking your baby for a walk, in the stroller, in cold weather, because then you're there, you're seeing, your baby. And I think that can be very reassuring to, especially to a new mom who is not familiar with this practice. Then, you're out there together, you can observe the baby, and okay, it's like, okay, maybe you go for a half-hour walk, an hour walk, and baby is sleeping nice and sound, and then, it's baby steps. You can take it from there,
Right.
and just do whatever you're comfortable with.
Were you able to find like because in the strollers there are different than the strollers here. My strollers are made of like tent material, and I'm like, I'm not gonna, I mean, it's for a toddler now, but I'm not gonna put her in that right now, because it's like, just, there's no protection. Where there, I feel like they're little mini cots and like made for sleeping, and they're warm.
I wasn't able to find anything at the time. I had to kind of improvise. I had to use the stroller I had, and I had to like build it up like myself with blankets and stuff, so that so there could be like a flat, so my babies could sleep flat on their backs, because you want that. You don't want them sleeping in a car seat, or obviously a stroller that doesn't recline all the way. So the best type of stroller, and now they actually, I've noticed a lot of brands offer these now, the bassinet insert, or attachment, whatever they call it. But a lot of the strollers, they come with the option of a bassinet, and that's very similar to the prams that people use over here in Europe. And that's the best kind for letting baby nap outside.
But are they insulated, or you're saying just use blankets?
No, they're not insulated. So then, you'll want to line it with like a lamb's wool, for example, and then a bunting bag. And then after that, you would just layer the baby, just like you would layer a bigger child that's playing outside. So the bunting bag and lamb's wool, that provides a little extra warmth, since the baby is not moving like an older child.
Right.
You got to provide that extra insulation. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna ask very logistical questions about this.
Yeah.
When you order lamb's wool, is it gonna come in like cords? I don't know. And like, it doesn't come as a sheet. Like, how does it come?
No, it comes with the skin. It's like a piece of skin, like a skin.
Oh,
with the wool still attached to it. Yeah.
Okay, so it's like a sheet.
Yeah, it's not a sheet. It's like an animal hide.
Right. But I mean, like the wool is attached to the skin still in a blanket somewhat form.
Yeah. Well, blanket form. It's usually a sheet form.
Oh, okay. Like what you would see on the floor? Like a
yes.
Okay. Yes. See, like I don't know these things. So so then did you cut it?
No.
You just laid it down like a blanket.
Yes, I slaughtered the lamb.
I know. well, what they do at my home country, but what I had to do in the United States on Amazon.
Yeah,
This is what
no,
I mean,
actually,
though. Like, I feel like I
they
looked
sell
this
them.
up.
They sell them at IKEA.
Yes.
They sell them at IKEA. Yeah.
Actually?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
That's what I used. They're just the right size.
I said, okay. So then, but then did you use it as like a blanket in the pram?
Not a blanket. I used it to line the pram, like underneath. I put it underneath the baby and the pram, just
Oh,
to
okay.
provide
Okay.
insulation from underneath. And then I
Okay.
put a bunting bag.
See, and I've never even heard of that word, bunting bag.
Okay, yeah.
Isn't this insane? I'm going to ask
like
these questions. So if the listeners are like, okay, thank you, Shayla. Okay, but bunting bag.
Yeah, it's like a little
Back.
sleeping bag for babies, essentially. Yeah.
So is it kind of okay, so I mean, and maybe it's just a different word, but it's almost like bibs sort of, and then just like a sleeping bag, or do they have arms?
No, the one I had was more like a sleeping bag, but not as tight around the face. But they come in different. I mean, there are all kinds of different styles. I think they're called, it's bunting bags. Definitely
sack?
the word I Googled. And so
I've seen it, but I've seen bunting snowsuit. And I'm like, so what does bunting mean? Not the shape.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to
but
Google
it worked.
it later. Okay, good. Yeah. So, okay. But those are the logistical things where I'm like, okay, lamb's wool, what? IKEA. Who knew? Yeah. Okay. So then can you talk about the layers of like underneath that?
Yes. So, so the first layer is the base layer, and ideally, like I love wool. I saw somebody online call it the unicorn material the other day, and I'm like, yes, that's it. That it's the unicorn material. It's like it's got everything.
Okay.
It's warm. It's, it transports moisture. It's like naturally odor repellent. Nothing you need to worry about with babies, obviously. But for us adults, that's nice. It's naturally antibacterial. It's just a really good. It's very easy to care for. You don't have to wash it very often.
Oh, that's good to know. I've been washing mine frequently. It's also anti-flam, like it doesn't flame resistant.
Yeah. And it's naturally flame resistant. Yes. Cool.
Unicorn.
Yeah, I know. With the one drawback that it is kind of pricey.
Yes.
So there's that, but it is a great material and all natural too, obviously. So ideally that's what you want to put, as your base layer. And I'm talking baby now. For an older child that's like very physically active, then a synthetic base layer would work as well. They're usually a little more lightweight, and they are also better at transporting moisture away from the body, which is more important when you're like working up a sweat.
Active.
Yes. So then after that, you'll want to go with the middle layer, and that's the layer that insulates. So that traps like pockets of air near your body. And so for a baby, that could be, like a fleece onesie or something like that. And then the outer layer, that's the one that protects you against the weather. And for a small baby, obviously, the stroller and the bunting bag will also, that's, and obviously you're not supposed to park your baby like out in the rain and snow, like so it needs to be undercover. So that's less of an issue for babies. But if we're talking about older kids, for a baby, the outer layer could be like a coverall type garment, something warm preferably. It doesn't have to be like waterproof and all that, since they're still protected. But for an older child, I guess I could show this. This is my preferred outdoor garment for an older child, or from toddler age till actually my 10-year-old still, she's almost 11 and she still loves her coveralls, which I
So do you want to
can't
walk
say.
through that for somebody listening and not watching?
What's that?
Will you walk through like
Yeah.
why you like this for somebody that's listening but not watching?
Yeah, sure. So these coveralls, what I like about them is that, well, first of all, they're warm. So for younger kids who are sometimes not as active, it's nice with an insulated outer garment. And this material is like really abrasion resistant. So, and that's what I like about, so that's why I'm like partial to like Scandinavian gear brands, because they have made clothes for kids who play outside in all types of weather and like risky play, like climbing trees that
Right.
like in the winter for generations. So they really know what they're doing. Also, it's dark here, so almost all the kids' gear has these reflective details.
Yeah.
And it's all like sewed onto
Interesting. I don't know that
the
I've
garment.
Yeah.
Which is great because that way, yeah. So your child is visible after dark, which is great because here it gets dark at like 3:00 in the winter time. So yeah. And also they have like these elastic straps under that go under your the child's feet, and elastic cuffs to keep snow and debris out. And another great thing about these, a lot of the Scandinavian brands, at least, they put like an extra hem allowance in the leg, so the garment can actually grow with the child. So people often ask me, well, how can I afford like this outdoor gear?
Right.
Well,
every
I'll tell
season.
you what, if you just spend the money on like one good coveralls, like your child can, they can wear that for 3 seasons. It's well worth the money. So I always size up, and if you have to, like, if you're on a budget, this is the garment that you want to put your money towards. Like, they can do without the wool base layer. You can use jammies if needed. You can find fleece, like I found a fleece jacket, like a Columbia fleece jacket at a yard sale once for $2.
What?
Now both, I'm not kidding. Both my kids have worn it. They've worn it to pieces. No, I mean, it's still, it's actually still in pretty good shape. Like, it's been in use now for like 5 years.
Wow.
That was pretty good value.
Yeah. So if you have like a 4T, would you recommend getting like a 6T?
What was that?
If you have a kid that wears like 4T, what would you recommend? Yeah. How much sizing up, to a 5 or a 6?
I would, that's hard. It just depends on the gear brands. Because see, the Scandinavian brands, they use a different sizing system. They use centimeters. So if you can, probably size up to a 6, but it also depends on the child as well, and the size, the different sizes of, because I feel like the American brands have there's a bigger difference between the brands in terms of like how they size stuff. Yeah. So like, what is a 4T? Like, it can be a different thing for like depending on which brand you're buying. So that's hard, but
But I think sizing up, I mean, if you go and try on something that's a 16, they're drowning in it. Obviously that's no fun, but maybe.
Right. They got to be able to move around in it. But yard sales are also a great option, or like swap meets.
Totally. Yeah.
You can swap outdoor gear with other people. I think that's a great thing too. And some of the gear brands also sell used stuff online now as well. Yeah. So that's.
Well, what I like about the snowsuit that you have, it's all one piece. So there's a hood, the arms are connected, the pants are connected. Because right now I've got Aaliyah in a bibs and a jacket, and it's a leopard jacket and blue bibs because they were both hand-me-downs. And I was like, yeah. But I'm like, we might need to do more of a onesie thing like that. Okay, guys, time for another break to talk about Clearly Filtered. I use this every single day to filter my water that I give to myself, to Aaliyah, to make rice, anything. I think I'm so obsessed with this company because I was able to ask the founders a bajillion questions and they answered all of them. And I posted those all on my blog. They have systems that go underneath the sink. So whatever comes out of your faucet's filtered. They have pitchers that go in your fridge, and then they have water bottles that you can fill up anywhere and have filtered water. If you're interested in checking it out, it's called Clearly Filtered, and Hey Shayla will get you 15% off. Let's get back to the show. One of the questions was like, how do I get my toddler to keep this gear on? And I'll let you answer that, but then I have a story to tell because I have lots of stories. But like, what would you do if your kid's like constantly taking off all this warm gear?
Well, I mean, it depends on the temperature, I guess. Like my intuitive reaction is just to be like, okay, they take it off. Eventually they're going to notice that it gets really darn cold and they're going to want to put it back on. So that's pretty much what I've done with my kids. Now, if it's -20 out, yeah, that could be an issue. But if it's happening when it's not quite that cold, typically just out of self-preservance, kids will, they will put the gear back on when they're cold enough. So that's why, like, I always keep spare hats and gloves, in our backpack. And it's like, yeah, we've had times when they've just refused to put stuff on, and we're like, okay, well, we're gonna go outside anyway. And then after a while, it's like, okay, I'm cold. Okay, well, here you go.
Right. And I think that's part of like the risky play, or like kind of letting them figure it out. Cause that's exactly what happened the other day. Aaliyah, when cause she's still so little. So like when she's got her boots and her snow pants on, it's all so bulky. And so she struts when she walks. She like is trying to walk, and she always pulls her hat off. And I'm like, I know that the hat like is what keeps all the heat in. So I'm like, oh, I really want you to.
That's a myth. That's an urban legend.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
So don't worry about it. No.
Okay.
Your body doesn't actually lose more heat through your head than anywhere else on your body.
Right.
It loses the proportionate amount of heat that any other part of your body. So. Okay,
good. Well, that makes me feel better. Well, she rips it off all the time, and I kind of say what you say. I'm like, well, you're probably warm, and I'm gonna just respect that. And when I look and your ears are really red, I'm gonna make you wear it. But we're also not far from the car. So I know that we're not in the middle of the woods out here for 3 days and you need to preserve your heat. Like, we can get back to the car. So she rips off her hat, throws it on the ground, and just keeps strutting. Then she takes one glove off, throws it on the ground, the other glove off, throws it on the ground, and keeps walking. And I'm just like behind her in the stroller, just rolling my eyes, picking these things up after her, throwing them in the stroller. And then I put my headband around her neck as kind of like a buff. She gets that up and over her head and throws it down and keeps walking. And then she turns around and she's like, hat? And I'm like, no, I already picked all of those things up. But then she we've got snowbanks because the plow comes and just like piles it up. So she's crawling on that before with her gloves. Well, now she doesn't have any gloves. And she's like, my hands are cold. And I'm like, do you want to put your gloves back on? She's like, yeah, gloves. And so she wore her gloves for the rest of the time. And I was like, okay, no amount of me trying to force those on you would have been effective. You kind of had to figure it out on your own. And before we were on a walk on a different day, and she had taken them off, and she was crying the whole way back to the car because her hands were cold because she refused to wear them. And I was like, we're not far. You haven't had your gloves off for that long. They are cold. You're not going to get frostbite. Just kind of like risk assessment to let them learn in a safe way.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And, a lot of times if you decide to pick a fight about it, It's gonna make things even worse. They're gonna dig in their heels, and they're definitely not wearing any gloves. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
So
that's the
it's
same.
better.
She wears them on opposite hands. And I'm like, well, you're just not going to have your thumbs. So good luck with that. And then she figures out still how to pick things up without her thumb. And I'm like, well, you
Like,
proved me
she
wrong.
showed
I guess.
you,
Yeah,
Mom.
exactly.
Yeah.
One thing, so you kind of said you want to minimize the skin exposure, but is there, I feel like I heard this in your book, that is there like a skin balm or something to help, or is it just SPF to help with like?
No, usually I recommend, if it's really cold out, the best thing you can do is to like not wash your child's face in the morning. And actually we don't do that in the morning, like ever during the winter, because the best protection for your child's face is your body's natural oils.
Stop.
So, I mean, you could use creams, but not, then it has to be like the really fatty kind. It has to be like no water in it. So it's not called it's not a cream, it's
Like
ointment, right?
Yeah.
Vaseline, yeah, something with like zero, basically
Water.
zero water in it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's just going to make matters worse. Personally, I've never really found a use for it, but if people feel inclined to try it, then yeah, that's I think the skin does better when it gets to regulate itself. So, but that's just me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then you kind of touched on it at some point, like when it's time to go inside, and it's kind of, is the back of the neck thing for older kids as well? Like checking their skin?
Yeah, I mean, you can, but older kids are also better able to
tell you,
communicate, yeah. So
okay, so I feel like we all just kind of need to,
if they're running around, they're gonna get sweaty, and that doesn't mean it's like dangerous or anything,
right? Okay, what I'm learning is that you kind of just need to use your own intuition, do a little bit of trial and error. Because I feel like my comfortability is like at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, 15, 20. Yeah. After that, I'm like, nah,
yeah.
I don't really want to go outside. Yeah. But because we've gone out, and that's kind of been the threshold that I've used, because I think I Googled it and it said 15 to 20 degrees. And I was like, okay, cool. That's what we're going to go with. And I get out there and I enjoy myself, believe it or not. And it's interesting because when I was reading it at first, I grew up in the suburbs and kind of like out in more open area. And now we're living in the city where Seth grew up. And I'm like, is the air even cleaner here? Like, should we be getting outside? Like, we live right next to a freeway. But I still feel like
the answer is yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it is, because you're still getting that air inside your home, but the difference is it gets trapped.
The recycled city air versus the fresh city air. Good. Let's see if I think we covered all the things. I'm like so stoked. I thank you for answering all my silly questions.
Yeah, no, it was fun. I highly enjoyed it. And I know there were so many more questions. And yes, I just wanted to tell people to, follow my Instagram account, and I will do my best in the next, couple of weeks to answer, all or most of the questions that people had for me as well. Because this always happens, we run out of time, and there's just not, it's not possible to cover everything. And I have a lot of information on my blog too, rainorShineMama.com, and that's mama with 2 N's. A lot of the questions I get over and over again, and I have, blog posts with like lots of information about, especially like outdoor napping. I have several posts about that, layering as well. So
do you feel like
the search function over there?
No, that's a great resource, because this podcast will probably go out later than when you're posting your stories. So just like, if they're not, well, they should follow you, because I feel like you share all this stuff all the time anyway. But having that blog post is a great resource. You're also writing a second book right now, aren't you?
I am, yes.
Yeah.
It's
Tell
supposed
me
to be
what.
out this fall, I think. I don't have a definite date yet, but it's going to be about the Nordic outdoor tradition of friluftsliv. If you
Ooh,
can pronounce that,
not
I
even.
dare you.
Friluftsliv? Is that close?
Yeah, close enough. Close enough.
Sure. Good effort. Good effort. I'll take it. I will take it.
Yeah, it loosely translates to open air life, and it's just about this lifestyle and philosophy that sort of revolves around connecting with nature on an everyday basis, which is a long-standing tradition here in Scandinavia. So I'm gonna try and spread it to the world.
I think that's amazing. Because even in the book, you talked about basic things of like having dinner outside.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's, we're looking at houses and I'm like, Seth, I need a big door, lots of windows, a patio outside so we can, like, you've changed my life, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Wanting to get outside and just trying to be prepared for it and creating the environment so that you have a big door instead of a whatever, just really focusing.
You want those seamless transitions between indoors and outdoors, especially when it gets a little warmer outside, so you can just, I love that. Yeah.
Me too. I'm excited for your book. I think that's going to be super great. Cool. Well, thank you so much for being on. It was such a fun time talking to you. And thanks for, like I said, answering all of my silly questions. I appreciate it.
It was great. Had a great time.
Awesome. All right. Well, I will catch you on Instagram and everybody else should too. Rain or shine, mama.
Yes.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you enjoyed it, please share with somebody you think would love. And I would be so honored if you would subscribe to the podcast and leave a comment and rating below so I can know what you guys are digging, what you want more of, just connect with you a little better. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.